patient would most likely only die. If you absolutely must use those methods, you will have to do it yourself. Maomao kept her voice calm and level. She felt for the young girl lying agonized on the bed, but she could not just administer a random treatment. If the girl died, there would be serious repercussions. If she ignored the mother and simply bawled ahead with a shocking treatment, however, she would get them thrown out. There was only one choice. She had to persuade the mother. I have to warn you, I don't think there is time to consult with another doctor. If possible, I want to do the surgery right here, right now. She looked at the mother, whose eyes darted to Tianyu. You are a real doctor, aren't you? What this assistant of yours is saying can't be right, can it? I concur with her opinion, Tianyu replied in his most serious tone. A simple gastrolith could be treated with one of the two methods she described. However, the swelling of the stomach in this case indicates an intestinal blockage. Your daughter needs immediate attention. He sounded far more official than he usually did, but Maomao found herself on edge just the same. She was worried that he might slip back into his typical off-handed tone at any moment. If you cut into her belly, won't that mean she can no longer bear children? The mother asked. We won't touch the womb. The blockage is located far away from the reproductive organs, Maomao said, communicating the results of her exam. She was lucky that the physical examination had revealed the location of the problem. If they kept their heads and worked calmly, this would be a relatively easy surgery. At least it would be for someone like Dr. Liu. This wasn't like attempting to remove lesions or even extracting a shattered bone. Maomao tried to look steady to reassure the mother. How much harm will you have to do? Whatever this thing is, it's not small, is it? The mother asked, looking at Maomao with anxiety all over her face. I'll make a 9-centimeter incision in the skin. Then I will cut into the stomach, remove the blockage and sew everything up with thread. There will be a scar, but it should fade as she grows. Maomao could not guarantee that the scar would disappear, a dire thought for the daughter of a noble family. 9 centimeters, the mother hesitated, but Maomao knew her daughter's life had to be more important to her. That is how long it will be if I do it. What does that mean? Maomao looked at Tianyu. If you allow the physician here to do the operation, I expect it would be less than half that length. It pained her to say it. Tianyu was, in fact, a gifted surgeon. Maomao knew this from seeing him dissect animals and work with cadavers. She might spend years practicing before she got as good as he was. Do not let it go to your head. You little Dr. Liu had warned them repeatedly during the dissections. When they did a real surgery, it would not be on a corpse. They were about to have a living, breathing human in front of them. He warned them there would be no room for error. They must always seek better surgical techniques. They could not allow their pride to cause a patient's death. Instead, they must throw away self-importance and rely on anyone and everyone they could. So Maomao said to the woman, a physician bears that title for a reason. If you want the best chance of saving your daughter, do not ask a simple assistant like me to do this. You would be better off trusting the doctor. The mother was silent for a long moment, hesitating. She looked at her suffering daughter, then narrowed her eyes and clenched her fist. Go ahead. Maomao let out a sigh of relief. We will need hot water and clean bandages. And could you start a fire for us? Yes. If possible, we also need some ice, but if that is not available, whatever will most effectively cool the body. The mother called a servant and ordered them to prepare everything Maomao and Tianyu would need for the surgery. While they waited, the two opened their bags of tools and took out surgical garments and white aprons. They put them on as they got ready. Maomao told Tianyu what she had observed during her examination of the patient and what she suspected the blockage was. Seriously, you think I can only speculate, but yes. She might lag behind him in dissection, but in terms of experience examining patients and assessing symptoms, Maomao was confident that she was ahead. She allowed herself a brief feeling of superiority at Tianyu's surprise. Nanyang, I'm going to do the actual surgery, but maybe you could handle the anesthetic. Each of us can do what we're best at. Do you have a surgical knife with you? But of course. Tianyu produced a finely honed knife. Maomao pulled out the medicines she'd brought along. The child was 8 years old and thin. Yes, they were going to be cutting open her belly, but of course they wanted to minimize the pain as much as possible. Maomao had several analgesics with her. Poppy, thornapple and henbane were the most well-known of these herbs. Many pain-killing medicines were also poisons. A misjudged dose could have serious consequences. Maomao had thornapple with her. She was more used to using it than either of the others. It is often dissolved in wine to administer it, but she would rather not. Liumen, Maomao's mentor in all things medical, hadn't approved of giving medications with wine. It would contribute to blunting the pain, but it could also cause changes in the body. It could encourage blood flow and make bleeding harder to stop. It was better avoided, especially with a child who would not be used to it. Maomao had in the past treated a burn without suitable tools or even decent anesthetic. That had been a special case where she suspected pain also brought the patient a certain kind of pleasure. She would not normally do that. No, she would never do it again. She weighed some medicine with a scale. The patient weighs about half what an adult does. She didn't want to give the girl too much medicine and cause side effects. She would have to work very carefully. Maomao gently sat the patient up. It hurts. The girl had been so quiet that Maomao had thought she was asleep, but now she spoke. Maomao smiled a little, then tilted the patient's chin up. Take this. It will help. She wetted the girl's lips with the painkiller and helped her drink it. It would take 30 minutes or so for the medicine to take effect. During that time they could prepare. I brought ice, said the servant, who arrived with ice wrapped in straw. Maomao took it and broke off some chunks. She put them in a leather bag and pressed it against the patient's stomach. They say you should never chill the abdomen, but there are exceptions to every rule. Maomao wanted to minimize the amount of painkillers she gave the girl, so instead she numbed the area by making it cold, just as she'd done with Jinshi. Tianyu polished his little knife, then heated it in the fire. He also had scissors and something to hold open the incision. What do we do about thread? Maomao asked. For the outside silk, everything inside gut, he replied. Gut was very literally thread made from animal intestines. Maomao carefully took out a cloth packet of thread and began inspecting each strand. Ideally, the size should be as consistent as possible. They wanted to avoid any frayed strands. It was a fraught moment assessing the implements. They were, after all, about to operate on a young girl. Finally, Maomao had to make a request of the child's mother. It was a cruel request. Sometimes the two of us won't have enough hands during the operation. Could some of your servants help us? Someone who isn't going to be too disturbed by the sight of blood. What needs to be done? The girl's mother asked. We've given her anesthetics, but it may not numb all the pain. I tried to go easy on the drugs, so there wouldn't be too many side effects. However, this means someone may have to hold your daughter down while we work, in case she starts thrashing from the pain. Is there any chance I could do it? Do you think you can retain your composure when you see your child in that much pain? Once we start the surgery, we won't be able to stop. Maomao gave the woman her most intense look. No matter how much the mother cared about her daughter, if she was going to get in the way, then Maomao needed her out of here. The mother, however, surprised Maomao with her acquiescence. All right, she said. Will 2 be enough? I thought for sure she would give me a hard time about it. The mother's face was pale. She must have been near her limit. A servant offered her water. The mother summoned 2 more servants and Maomao instructed them to wash their hands, then dabbed their hands with alcohol. Both of the newcomers were doughty middle-aged women who didn't look like they would cower at a little blood. All right. What say we get started? Said Tianyu, who had wrapped a cloth around his mouth and another around his head. They transferred the patient to an improvised surgical table. The servants had created it by putting some long tables together. The patient was breathing much easier. Perhaps the painkillers were taking effect. Maomao placed a rag in the girl's mouth so she wouldn't bite her tongue. Then they had the servants hold the girl's arms and legs. Maomao arranged an apron to cover everything but the operating site. It was full dark outside, and they had several lights brought so that they could see where they were supposed to cut. To Maomao, it almost looked like the flames danced in answer to the patient's breathing. In, out. It was true working on the living was different from working on the dead. However much they had chilled the skin, there would be blood. The blade of Tianyu's knife was as fine as a razor. Tools are an important part of doctoring, Maomao thought. Dr. Liu could exhort them as much as he liked to keep their ego out of it. Still, it annoyed Maomao that she wasn't as skilled as Tianyu. If she could get her hands on some tools that might help close the gap, then she wanted to. The patient was looking pretty out of it from the drugs. Her perceptions were successfully numbed. That came as a relief to Maomao, who wiped at the blood that poured forth as Tianyu worked. Here it is, Tianyu said, his fingers brushing the swollen small intestine. He gently made an incision with his knife, then plunged a pair of forceps into the opening. Even the servants who had watched them cut the girl's stomach open without flinching recoiled. Is there something in there? You called it Nine-Yang. With the forceps, Tianyu extracted a ball of undigested fruit fibers and a substantial quantity of hair that trailed from the intestine. Out and out it came as he pulled, dangling grotesquely. Maomao offered Tianyu a tray, and he dropped the hair and fiber lump into it. There was still hair in the intestines, so Tianyu went back in with the forceps. Maomao had her mouth and nose covered, but even so the smell was nauseating. It was an acrid mix of blood, alcohol and stomach juices. The servants turned away as best they could, but they kept hold of the girl's arms and legs, faithful to the end. I didn't think a gastrolith formed exclusively of persimmon pits would be enough to cause an intestinal blockage, Maomao said. The patient's lack of appetite could probably be explained by her habit of eating her own hair. It wasn't entirely uncommon. Some people ate things that weren't food as a response to stress. In this case, the girl had eaten more of her hair than usual because of the stress of the grasshopper plague. She exacerbated it with fibrous fruits and then persimmons. All of them together had formed the blockage. Tianyu decided he had extracted all the hair he could and set the forceps aside. There were probably still strands in there, but they weren't going to be able to get all of them. The rest could be addressed by drinking copious water and maybe taking some laxatives to help work them through. Maomao passed Tianyu the needle and thread. She used a hook to hold the incision open, making it easier to see the intestines, and wiped up the blood as it continued to flow. Each time Tianyu finished with a stitch, he swapped for the scissors and cut the thread. He stayed stooped over the patient as sweat poured down his brow. When she was sure they had tied the last knot, Maomao felt a wave of exhaustion. She wished they could just put the patient back in bed, but this wasn't over yet. She wiped down the surgical site, taking care not to press too hard. Tianyu had been the star of the surgery itself, but it would fall on Maomao to care for the patient now that the procedure was over. She'll need more painkillers for sure, and I should prepare some fever medication. Something to stop infection will be crucial. I also have to explain to them what she should eat and how to care for her now that the operation is over. There was much to do. At the same time, Maomao wanted to ask the patient's mother a few questions. The servants who had been holding the girl down looked almost as spent as the doctors felt. The child had not fought, thankfully, but they were exhausted nonetheless. Say Nyingyang, said Tianyu, who had already scrambled out of his blood-soaked surgical garment. He took the forceps and picked up the object they had extracted. Do gastric juices make hair change color? The hairball was discolored in places, brownish. Somewhat maybe. Citrus juice can do it after all. Maomao looked again at the patient's hair. It was thin because she had been pulling it out and eating it. The roots were white. Maomao took the tray with the blockage on it and opened the door. You are finished, the girl's mother asked. She was there, her face was pale. She must have been waiting at the door the entire time. Lihaku was simply sitting in a chair. He was used to waiting around. Yes, the surgery was a success, Maomao said. Would you come inside so we can give you some instructions? Yes, of course. The mother and a servant entered. The servant was the one who had summoned Maomao and Tianyu. As she and her mistress entered, the other two servants, the ones who had held the girl down, left the room. Who do you want to handle the instructions? Maomao asked Tianyu. Sounds annoying, you do it. Each of us does what we're best at, right? Anyway, I get the feeling you've noticed something that was lost on me. As skilled a surgeon as he was, Tianyu was still Tianyu. Once the mother and her servant were inside, Maomao made sure the door was closed, then showed them the tray. This is what was stuck in your daughter's intestines. The other two women cringed when they saw the undigested lump of fruit and hair. Why didn't you tell us that your daughter has a habit of eating her own hair? The mother couldn't quite meet Maomao's eyes. Maomao supplied her own answer. No highborn person could bear the idea of anyone knowing their daughter did something so uncouth, could they? Fine. She had half a mind to needle them about it a little more, but she would have to leave it at that. The issue was they couldn't afford to have something like this happen again. Abnormal behaviors like eating one's own hair are frequently caused by stress. Has anything happened to your daughter that might account for that? No, the woman said slowly. No, I've only brought her up in the way that any mother would. Liar, Maomao picked up the lump with the forceps. The light and dark hairs formed a mottled pattern. Your daughter's hair is naturally auburn, isn't it? You've been dyeing it black, that's the source of the stress. Or am I wrong? The mother flinched. She pursed her lips and one eye began to twitch. Her lady-in-waiting looked at the ground. If we don't resolve the cause, this will only happen again. How many times do you want your daughter's stomach to be cut open? It's not like I enjoy doing it, the mother said softly. But the girl has light brown hair and her father and I both have black hair. Even two parents with black hair can produce a child with brown hair. It must happen fairly often here in Isei province. There's enough foreign blood going around. After a long moment the woman said, my father won't see it that way. Her father, that would be Jayakuo. What did he have to do with this? My father hates all foreign blood. I say province is part of Li, so he believes it should be ruled by a black-haired Linese. I always thought the same thing, until his own daughter gave birth to a grandchild with light hair. My father was distraught by his granddaughter. I had heard that an infant's hair color can grow darker with age, so I told him she would have black hair eventually. But she never did. So the white roots weren't from hair that had gone white with fear, but because the mother hadn't had time to redye her daughter's hair during the swarm. The servant was not saying anything, so Maomao suspected she was helping to dye the patient's hair. She hates foreigners, huh? That was a tough philosophy to get away with when you lived in a nexus of trade. Then again, sometimes familiarity was precisely what bred contempt. Maomao thought of her red-haired empress. Gyokyu and her half-brother might both be Gyukyuan's children, but the family wasn't monolithic, as this story showed. If she won't stop eating her hair, then I suggest shaving her head until she calms down, said Maomao. It seemed like the quickest way. Shave her head? What is she, a nun? If you let it keep growing, she'll just have baldish patches, and will that look better? Besides, if she continues to damage the roots, eventually the hair will stop growing at all. As she talked, Maomao began taking medicines out of her bag. Anti-infective agents, antipyretics, painkillers. At the moment, seeing her safely through the hours and days after her surgery is more important. I am going to give you detailed instructions. If you do not understand them, I can write down the important points. She needs someone to keep an eye on her post-surgical progress. It does not have to be me and this physician if you do not like us, but make sure you get some doctor to look at her. I do have to warn you that even if the surgery was a success, she could take a turn for the worse if she does not get proper treatment after. If the wound opened or got infected, for example, there would be trouble. For now she is still numb, so she is calm, but as the painkillers wear off, it is going to start hurting. Do not let her touch the surgical site. The pain may keep her awake and she may run a fever. I have medicines here for both those possibilities that you can use as necessary. There was a moment as the woman absorbed all this, then she said, I understand. Her lip quivered as she approached the bed where her daughter slept. She brushed her thin hair, a faint hint of relief on her face. Then Tianyu spoke up. He said I kept the incision to half as long as my assistant said, and it was true. He had cut barely half of what Maomao had threatened. What was more, the stitches were as delicate as the incision itself. If all went well, the scar would be virtually invisible. Maomao couldn't suppress a flash of annoyance even as she wrote down her instructions. She wondered if the patient would really follow them. She had her doubts, but she was very, very eager to get this over with and leave. Chapter 2: The Strategist Strikes. No sooner had they returned to the annex than they were summoned to Jinchi's chambers. It seemed it couldn't wait until tomorrow. It was the middle of the night, and everyone but the guard on duty was sound asleep. The air was cold, and worse, Maomao hadn't eaten dinner. She was desperate to be done with this. When she reached Jinchi's room, she discovered his desk riddled with abandoned drafts of numerous letters. Surin or Taomei might have picked them up if they had been there. The fact they were still lying around showed the ladies in waiting must really have their hands full. Maomao was clearly not the only one staying up late to work. For a moment she thought no one was in the room. Then she happened to see Baryu peering out from behind a curtain. For a second, a charge went through the air between them, like two feral cats bumping into each other. Then Baryu vanished back behind his curtain without a word. Something else peeked out from behind the curtain, in his stead a duck with a black spot on her bill. Without Basin around, Baryu must be taking care of her. He wasn't much for human company, but maybe a duck was all right. She felt there was a real risk of the duck being eaten by Miss Chu. Apparently her husband's protection was enough to save the duck from the wife's cleaver. "Oh, Maomao, you're here," said Sujin, who appeared from a back room. Maomao turned to her as if nothing out of the ordinary were going on. "Yes, ma'am. I went to do a medical examination on Master Gyukuo's granddaughter. I think Miss Chu told you about it. Tianyu, the physician, was with me. He is at the medical office now. He had dumped the entire reporting to Jinchi thing on Maomao on the grounds of each doing what we are best at. When she thought of him sitting down to dinner, late but still earlier than her, she privately vowed to serve him another cup of swersha tea. For now, she gave Surin a brief rundown. "I will go call the Moon Prince," the other woman said. Before she went, she collected the discarded letters and put them in a basket. "That is an awful lot of false starts," Maomao remarked. "He has just been writing letters to anyone he thinks he can count on. He must have written close to 100, no, 200 even. 200. From what Maomao could see of the attempted letters, Each one began with the sort of fulsome, vacuous description of the season expected of a message from a member of the imperial family.